Welcome to Buffalo Pregame, your source for live Buffalo hockey discussion, news, analysis, opinions, and more. Presented by ASM Publications.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the premiere episode of Buffalo Pregame. I'm your host, Alex Brasky, here for ASM Publications. Today on the premiere show, I'll be joined by Walt of the Sabremetrix Pod and the Charging Buffalo, followed by Chris Parker, more widely known as WGR 550's Bulldog, as we discuss the Sabres offseason, including the Bowen Byram saga, and much, much more. Thank you for joining me in this new venture, which will allow me to place more of my focus on Buffalo's two favorite teams, the Bills and Sabres, which I'm going to dive into more so with print coverage as well as coverage on the podcast and video side. So excited to add that to the repertoire. And each week I'll provide updates on the NFL, NHL, and much, much more via daily articles, podcasts, videos, and more. I'm ready for this new challenge as I moved back into a more independent phase of my career. I started my career as a sports blogger back in 2013. I've now gained valuable experience as a sports editor of a city newspaper and back to forging it alone here on Buffalo Pregame. But I won't be alone today, as I said before, joined by Sabremetrix and at Bulldog WGR. That's where you can find Walt and Chris on X. And please subscribe to Buffalo Pregame with Alex Brasky on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, along with Buffalo Pregame with Alex Brasky on Substack, both of which are free of charge. Please also consider subscribing to Bills Digest, the official magazine of the Buffalo Bills. You can do so by visiting billsdigest.com. So thank you for indulging my self-promotion to kick off this premiere podcast. Now let's get down to the reason we are here today, and that's to talk the Sabres offseason and look ahead to what's to come over the next few weeks and months. And each week we'll discuss Buffalo's now fledgling hockey team, along with all the comings and goings from KeyBank Center. So let's get right to it, as the topic on every Sabres fan's mind at this point of the offseason is Bowen Byram, and why has he not been traded at this time? It appeared that Byram was dead set to be dealt when the offseason began. The Sabres, in search of a top six forward to improve that forward group, and Kevin Adams and his group and in the front office have not been able to find a deal that has suited their fancy. So Byram remains on the Sabres roster, and the Sabres have now elected to take Byram to arbitration, which will allow him to take either a 1 or 2 year award. If he takes the 2-year award, he walks right to unrestricted free agency. So some decisions still to be made, and we'll talk with both of our guests later on their perspective on exactly what's going on with Bowen Byram and maybe what to expect over the next, like I said, days and weeks. But Kevin Adams said before all of this hubbub started that the Sabres were not shopping Bowen Byram, instead just looking for a deal that fit with what they're trying to do moving forward. Said he believes Bowen Byram can still help this team win moving forward, and he's really remained steadfast in that perspective throughout this offseason. Byram, 7 goals, 31 assists last season. He paired very well with Rasmus Dahlin, on that top defensive pairing, and that's really where he made his hay alongside the Sabres captain. But it doesn't appear as if he's going to have much opportunity on the power play moving forward. It looks like Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, really the top 2 Sabres defensemen that man the power play. And I think that's what it seems like Byram is looking to move into the next phase of his career, look to add some more scoring to his game, because that's where the big bucks start to fly. And I don't think that opportunity is going to be there for him in Buffalo with Power and Dahlin. He's about to be 25 years old, so he's going to have a decision to make after the Sabres elected for arbitration. He does have that 1 or 2 year decision. The 2 year, like I said, would take him right to unrestricted free agency, and then he could kind of decide his future from there. And we've seen so many players do that this offseason and earn big bucks in good situations. And I'm sure that's what Byram has his sights set on moving forward. And also, after the Sabres elected for our arbitration, Byram can no longer receive an offer sheet. And that was widely discussed to begin the offseason, as Kevin Adams claimed that's why the Sabres were holding $12 to $13 million in cap space this offseason, for the off chance that a team would offer up an offer sheet for Bowen Byram. But that did not come to pass. And the Sabres will still need some money to take care of Byram after arbitration, probably somewhere between $7-8 million. But we'll see how things work out. It's certainly been a saga. It's certainly been something to follow over these past few weeks, and it will continue to be a topic of discussion amongst the Sabre hood. And with that, why don't we bring in our first guest, Walt of the Sabremetrix Podcast and the Charging Buffalo. Grateful, to have him join the Premier Podcast. Welcome in, Walt of the Sabremetrix Pod and the Charging Buffalo. Be sure to subscribe to he and his co-host Bill's podcast and the email list. They'll keep you up to date with all the comings and goings in the Sabre hood. It's been a struggle the past few years, but at the same time, Walt and Bill have really done a great job. They're great follows on social media as well. Walt, before we get into our Sabres discussion, thank you for joining me. How are you, my friend?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to talking about the Sabres.
Yeah, you got it. We've I've been following your guys' podcasts and your coverage throughout the draft and throughout the offseason, as many outlets, and there's been a lot of discussion about Bowen Byram, and that's where we'll start this discussion. I think that's where all Sabres fans' minds are really at this time, where the Bowen Byram saga sits at this point. We know that the Sabres elected for arbitration with Byram, which gives him the chance to take either 1 or 2 year. It's now his election or his option to take whatever award that he wants at 1 or 2 year. And the 2 year will walk him right into unrestricted free agency, as was widely reported by Elliot Friedman and others. So I guess my first question here, what did the Sabres have to do? What did they have to gain by taking Bowen Byram to arbitration and pulling that trigger? Byram had the option to go to arbitration. He elected not to. The Sabres take him there. What do they have to gain by doing that?
Well, I think one thing is you eliminate the option of other teams offer sheeting him. I think that was one thing that I wasn't sure how realistic that was, but based on Adam's presser and, even some of the stuff coming from Elliot Friedman, it seemed like a somewhat realistic possibility of him getting offer sheeted. So it does protect them from that. So I guess in a way it does buy them a little bit more time if they thought an offer sheet was looming in terms of looking for a trade. So I think it allows them to kind of, sit back for a little bit. And, even when the arbitration is awarded, he still is able to get traded after that. So I guess you could look at it that way as well. So I don't necessarily think it's making it seem more like he's going to stay a Sabre, but I do think it gives the Sabres like a little bit more time to, find the perfect trade.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more control for the Sabres now, although they're kind of relinquishing that control in terms of whether he wants to take the 1 year deal or the 2 year deal. And you mentioned the offer sheet. That was the talk with Kevin Adams, how the Sabres were saving all that money in case he got offer sheeted. Obviously, that doesn't happen, so that calls that strategy into question. But with that being said, how much money do you think Byram gets through arbitration, and what is that based on exactly? I'm not the hockey aficionado that you are, but by my understanding, it's based on comparisons of players and kind of production within that player's same class.
Yeah, so it's pretty much based on that, and it's kind of different than other sports arbitrations too, because you'll have two sides come in with very different numbers, and it's kind of up to the arbitrator to decide where that number lands. The arbitrator doesn't have to pick a side like in some other sports, which, I think would probably be a better option, because you just end up with both sides coming with some goofy numbers to start off with, and the number always lands somewhere in between. So I do think, with arbitration, I want to say with the new defense contracts, he probably at least clears like $7 million, because I do look at his point production. That's been solid. It'll be interesting to see how much like the arbitration process these days kind of takes into account like analytics and even like his minutes away from Dahlin. Like I doubt they dive too much into that, but that's definitely something that the Sabres may bring up in the arbitration process, which, is another thing, because I kind of feel like the arbitration process is kind of toxic to be in at times, because you have the team talking about why the player isn't worth that much. You have the player talking about why they're worth this much. So that whole process could be a little bit like that. But yeah, I think he probably clears $7 million. And, they're tossing out some crazy numbers, like Elliot Friedman and whatnot, in terms of what teams are willing to offer sheet for Byram. I don't know if that actually would have happened, but if they were talking about $10 million, $11 million offer sheet per year, like I don't think that would have been something we would have seen happen, but there are rumblings of it. So I do think his arbitration award will definitely be under that. And I do think it will be manageable for the Sabres to fit under their salary cap as well, because they still have a decent amount of cap space at this point in the offseason.
Yeah, I think they're sitting right around $12-13 million, somewhere in that range. And that goes with the number that I heard, the number you threw out there with Byram. I think I heard somewhere at $7.5 million through arbitration. So, right, they should have plenty of money and maybe even to add. I know that there's not a lot out there on the free agent pool, but might have some extra money to add beyond that as well. Now, did the Sabres play this thing correctly here? I know you kind of hinted at it already, but with the offer sheet going away, now Byram getting to elect the award through arbitration, they said they were saving that money for the offer sheet. It never came. A trade obviously still could happen, and you mentioned that, how they're kind of setting themselves up for that possibility. In your opinion, did they play this correctly? Did they play it incorrectly, or is it still to be determined with a potential trade to come down the road?
Yeah, I guess some of it's still to be determined, but I do think at this stage of the game, I think they played it correctly, because I do think taking him to arbitration gives them a little bit more flexibility in the present. I do think, looking at a big picture, though, I still think Byram was a guy that probably should have been added into a deal with Dylan Cousins or even a deal with JJ Peterka to kind of get that bigger fish asset. So from that perspective, I do think they kind of held on to Byram too long, because he's obviously kind of their last main trade piece left, and they don't even have that, top 10 draft pick to package with him in a deal anymore either. So it would have been nice to see him get moved earlier, but if they weren't able to find the market for him and they were stuck with him after the draft and through free agency, I do think, the right move was taking him to arbitration.
Yeah, I certainly would have liked to see him dealt a little bit earlier, like you said, packaged with another player that could potentially bring in that big fish top six forward that the team's been looking for. But at the same time, a young player, Kevin Adams, has been kind of burned in the past with trading his players away that go on to win Stanley Cup. So I could see, in one sense, why the general manager would be gun shy. But certainly it seems like throughout league circles, Adams is not easy to part with some of these players, and that lends to what you just said, maybe held on to him a little too long. And to branch off something else you said, what is the likely return for Byram at this point? The pool for trade options is really gone dry as well. Can they still get a top six forward? What teams have been involved in trade talks with the Sabres from what you've been hearing reported throughout the league? That's one good thing with the NHL. I know it can be confusing with the numbers, the arbitration, the offer sheets, the qualifying offers, but the insiders throughout the sport do such a good job breaking things down and really being on top of that. So what have you been hearing on the Byram front? What would be the likely return, like I said, and what teams are involved?
Yeah, I do think St. Louis was a name that was coming up a lot, just a few days ago. And I do think a name on there like Jake Neighbors, I think he's someone that makes, a lot of sense in a deal for Byram, because he does have that top six upside. He has had top six goal production too, but he's not necessarily the most perfect forward. He's someone who's a little bit goal heavy and doesn't get a lot of assists. And that's, kind of something the Sabres have a lot of right now. I mean, maybe not too much of, but even acquiring someone like Josh Norris, he's more of like a goal scoring guy over a playmaker. So Neighbors would kind of add to that a little bit, but at the same time, he plays with an edge. He's still relatively young, and I think that's probably like best case scenario in terms of a player you can realistically get from that Blues roster. Because I just think a name like Dylan Holloway, I just think he's far too good for the Blues to part with in a Byram trade. And then Jordan Kyrou, obviously, really good player. He'd also have to waive some no trade stuff, so that's probably out of the picture. So I think someone like Jake Neighbors on St. Louis would be a good return. And then even Los Angeles was a team that, has been interested in Byram at points. I know they made some moves in free agency on defense, so I don't know if that interest is still as strong, but they do still have Alex Ferrier. I think he's someone who, is probably a little bit more valuable than Byram, but he's someone that the Kings really trusted last season on their power play. They even gave him top 6 ice time last year. And I think he's a great role player too. So I think he's similar to like that kind of Jake Neighbors mold a little bit, where I think that's probably like best case scenario you could hope for in a trade involving Bowen Byram.
Yeah, Jordan Kyrou was the name circulating throughout Sabres fandom for much of this offseason in links to a trade for Byram. But yeah, I think that's a little out of budget for the Sabres. And I'm not sure, like you said, with the no trade clause, that's a player that would want to come to a situation in Buffalo that has developed into quite the toxic situation. I think we've seen that throughout the league, that players aren't really jumping at the chance to come to a place like Buffalo. And I made a point that maybe players that are looking to get out of the spotlight come to Buffalo, but the more you think about it, and the more that fans' angst grows year after year, the more these players are under the microscope when they come here. So I think a player with a no trade clause, I'm not sure Buffalo would be high on his options to be traded. What does it look like if Byram stays in Buffalo? He doesn't seem like he's a player that the team's worried is going to ruffle any feathers or potentially create a bad situation. So it seems like they are willing to bring him back. What does it look like if he does stay in Buffalo?
Well, I do think you definitely have your partner with Dahlin then. I don't think they'll be able to replicate kind of like their goal share at 5-on-5 last year. But I do think, like, even looking at their expected goal share at 5-on-5 last year, it was still good enough to be a good top pair. And I think if they could outperform their expected goal share, that's a pretty solid top pair to have. And I'm guessing that would probably be the plan, because Byram definitely didn't look too great away from Dahlin when he had to play away from him later in the season. So I think the Sabres decor, I think you definitely go Dahlin, Byram top pair, and then probably Power Kesselring on the second pair. And then that third pair, you're probably looking at like Samuelson and Timmins. And that's, it's a pretty solid defense group. I don't necessarily know if that's like the way you win in the NHL today, is by having an extremely deep defense group and being weak in terms of top 6 forwards, but it would at least be a strength for the Sabres.
It's almost like they're flipping their ideology from Don Granato to now Lindy Ruff. They went from speed, skill, goal scoring to now trying to limit people on the defensive end. So you're right. It's certainly a contrasting style to things that we've seen in the past, but we're certainly going to see if it works out or not, because they're fully committing to it and going full steam ahead with that new philosophy. Next topic we'll get to, a little bit of backtracking. What happened with Jacob Bernard-Docker from your perspective? The Sabres let him walk in free agency. They didn't submit the qualifying offer. It seemed at the time the team basically wanted to save a couple $100,000, something in that range. Kevin Adams claimed that Bernard-Docker would have gotten more than the $875 that he got from Detroit, based on, here, I'll read the quote. When I'm talking about salary, so people understand, when you qualify a player to retain their rights, but then based on their rights they have after a qualifying offer, if they have arbitration rights, they're slotted in based on comps in their class. And that number was significantly higher than the $875,000 that, in parentheses, based on the market and the comps that go into it. So the Sabres viewed it a little bit differently than I think others in the media and in the fan sphere did. Do we believe what Kevin Adams is saying? This isn't Paul Coffey on defense. He was effective in limited time with the Sabres after coming over from Ottawa last year. He is a right shot defenseman, something the Sabres were looking to add this offseason. Why let him walk? And do we believe what Adams is saying? Obviously, he's a little bit more in tune than we are, but does that ring true to you, what he had to say about the money?
Honestly, the whole situation doesn't make too much sense to me because I know earlier in the offseason he talked about how hard it is to acquire right-handed shot defensemen. And, right now they could probably use a depth right-handed shot defenseman. So to have Bernard Docker walk with the amount of salary he took with Detroit, really doesn't make too much sense to me. I do think that, maybe the Sabres didn't value him that much in that Cousins-Norris swap. I do think the Sabres legitimately thought that Josh Norris was worth a second-round pick more than Dylan Cousins, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. But, yeah, I don't necessarily think that second-round pick was for Jacob Bernard Docker, and I do think Bernard Docker is a guy they viewed as just a seventh defenseman. So in terms of that, I guess it's not too crazy, but it's I feel like at his age, at that cost, I just think he's such a good depth option to have. I don't really understand why they let him go, but that's kind of what we expect of the Sabres the past 6 years or so.
And it's tough to give them the benefit of the doubt at this time, especially with Kevin Adams. Some of the things that he says and then the actions that the team takes don't necessarily match in all situations. So it's tough to, like I said, give them the benefit of the doubt in all situations. Just a couple more topics here. Where do things stand with Alex Tuch? He's a UFA after this year. The Sabres would obviously like to keep a player of his caliber and his leadership ability as well, but with their continued struggles, there's no telling if he even wants to stick around. Kevin Adams last week, I think it was, said there's really no pressure point for the Sabres to get anything done with Tuch at this point, especially in comparison with some of the other things on their plate. I can imagine the Byram thing really filling their plate at this point, but they're going to have to address it soon. How much money would he attract on the open market? I think somewhere within $7-8 million. But what about term? What is he looking for out of a new deal, whether it be from the Sabres? Do you think they'll get it done, or do you think he'll hit the open market?
I do think it's definitely not the best situation to not have that contract signed the first day he was able to sign it. It definitely makes you a little worried. I definitely think he's someone that will expect, decent term and decent money if he were to stay in Buffalo, because that's really, kind of really the only difference Buffalo could offer compared to other teams. Because I do just think about how close he was to winning a cup with Vegas. He had some great playoff games there. And then you just come to Buffalo, which is obviously closer to his hometown, but he really hasn't played too many meaningful hockey games since joining the Sabres, no games in the playoffs. So I think it would come down to what he values. And I do think if he's still not signed when this season starts, I think there's a lot, kind of in the balance with this season, because, if they come out the gate slow, if they struggle next year, and then, that contract negotiation pushes itself closer to July 1st, or even to the trade deadline, I could see a way where he's no longer a Sabre. Because, I just think, probably the same thing for a lot of guys too. I think there's just so much weighing on this upcoming season where, if they come out and have another 80-ish point season, I just don't know if that'll be good enough for a lot of guys to want to stay here. And I think Tuch, even though he is kind of the hometown hero here, I think he also kind of has to look at him, kind of entering his 30s. He's never won a Stanley Cup. He hasn't played in the playoffs in a very long time, at least since joining the Sabres. So, yeah, I think it'll be tough. If they don't get it done this offseason, I think a lot of things could snowball and it could get worse as we enter this upcoming season.
Yeah, Tuch's been a real good soldier ever since he got traded over here, and I think some of that is wearing thin at this point. You saw Rasmus Dahlin go and have that meeting with Kevin Adams. I think Tuch is really right along those same lines. If he's fed up with the circumstances surrounding this team, and like you said, sees his career kind of reaching those critical years and winding down. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not they get it done. Kevin Adams says no pressure point to get it done, but boy, that'd be a player that I'd be running to get a deal done with. here over the next few weeks. Did anything come out of, this is the final thing, did anything come out of development camp from your perspective? I kind of followed it at an arm's length. I know there wasn't much excitement surrounding it this year. First look at the first round pick, Murtka, and not many forwards this year. Anything of note taking place at development camp?
Yeah, I do think probably the most noteworthy thing is just how much smaller the development camp is now. I guess it's like a new kind of organizational thing where they kind of focus more on the newly drafted guys more than having, guys like Consta Helenius, for example, joining the development camp for a week. And I'm not sure if that's like my favorite setup, but it does seem like there are teams around the league that are kind of trending towards a smaller development camp versus like the massive like 40 player development camp where you could have a full 5-on-5 scrimmage that we've seen in the past. So I thought that was a little interesting. And in terms of players, I guess it was nice to, see Murtka in a Sabres uniform for the first time. I thought it was interesting too, Jake Richard from the UConn prospect. He's going to be a UFA at the end of this upcoming season in terms of who he could sign with in the NHL. So it was at least nice to see him at development camp. Maybe that points towards a contract being done at the end of next season. But, who knows with the Sabres, but I guess that was a good sign there at least.
All right. Walt, Sabremetrix, at Sabremetrix. You can follow him on X, Sabremetrix Pod, the Charging Buffalo. Tell the people what you have coming down the pike. I know it's probably entering a little bit slower of a point for the NHL coverage cycle, but what are you guys working on over there?
Yeah, we'll be doing some more video content with the Sabremetrix podcast. We'll be doing a Bowen Byram either signing or trade breakdown whenever that happens, and then hopefully take a little bit of a summer break, and then we'll be right back into things with some season previews, some more video content, and some more written content with the Charging Buffalo too if you subscribe to our newsletter.
All right, well, appreciate you joining me, my friend. We'll see you next time. I'd like to thank Walt from the Sabremetrix Pod and the Charging Buffalo for joining me on the Premier Podcast. Looking forward to another discussion quickly, but I think my main takeaway from Walt was he thinks the Sabres have handled this Bowen Byram situation as well as they could have up to this point. I think there's still some yet to be determined with whether or not the trade eventually happens and what the Sabres are able to get out of that. But I think Walt is relatively satisfied with how the Sabres have navigated that process. So we'll see what arbitration holds and then what a potential deal will hold down the road as well. But without further ado, why don't we welcome our next guest, and that is the Bulldog from WGR's Shope and the Bulldog, Chris Parker. My friend, how are you?
I'm doing great, Alex. How are you tonight?
I'm doing very, very well. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. A lot to talk about the Sabres before we really go full steam ahead with the Buffalo Bills. I think coverage is already starting to shift toward the Bills, but we want to make sure we get the Sabres points. And I've been listening to you guys' show over the past several days, so wanted to get some opinions. And I'm sure that there's a lot yet to be determined in your eyes as well with the Bowen Byram situation. We'll get to that down the road, but I wanted to start with some additions made by the Sabres this offseason in terms of the skaters that they added and what you think of the J.J. Peterka trade, the value that the Sabres got. They get Michael Kesselring, a 25-year-old defender, 7 goals, 22 assists, and 89 penalty minutes for Utah in 82 games last year. And Josh Doan, a 23-year-old, 7 goals, 12 assists in 51 games for Utah. What's your perspective on that deal? What do you think the Sabres are getting from Kesselring and then Doan as well?
Well, I'm really conflicted about it now because when it happened on the Wednesday before the draft, the Peterka trade, I thought, okay, well, in a vacuum here, I can get with this. I like, it took them 3 years to find a partner for Owen Power, but I like Kesselring as that. So, check. Like the package he is, right? The size, the big shot, physicality. And was pretty excited about Josh Doan too. Not that I'm thinking he's going to play over what he's done so far, but he's still young enough that he could grow into something more. But probably a middle six guy pressed into second line, maybe, but probably a third or fourth line guy. Still fine, role player, good, but you gotta to get the full grade from me, like a positive full grade, you're going to have to find your way to turning Byram into the scoring you're losing in Peterka. And whether or not they had a mind to actually want to do that or not, I guess we could argue about. But it doesn't seem like they're going to do it. And it's hard for me to get behind divesting yourself of Peterka for the return without a plan in place to supplement your roster. So I think all in all right now, I am very down on how they've handled the offseason so far. This nonsense about saving cap money for an offer sheet, which you could control whether it was going to come by doing what they did on Saturday or Sunday, whatever day that was, when they decided to elect salary arbitration. So that just sounds like this year's reason to not spend to the cap. And I'm pretty annoyed, mostly because, Alex, I don't like to be ghoulish about anything, especially a sports team that I grew up loving and still love to this day. So I try to find, okay, I like Kesselring. I like Doan. Okay, this can work. I don't want to be a jerk today and say they got ripped off in this trade, but they got ripped off in the trade is the bottom line. If that's it, if there's no Byram turning into a package that gets you Jordan Kyrou or something, then the whole thing kind of is a joke show.
Yeah, and that's kind of the product of where the Sabres are at this point. When you have a player like Peterka who doesn't want to stick around, you really don't have many legs to stand on in that situation. If he wants out, teams know that. You don't have much leverage in trade talks, and it certainly played out that way. And the way that the Sabres handled that whole situation could be talked about.
Yeah. I'd like to say one more time just to hear myself say it one more time. And I don't think this is always the way you can get away with doing business. The players do control a lot of it, but I don't know, man. It's just such a sorry state of affairs that the Sabres couldn't go to Turkey like, dude, you're 4 years away from UFA. Shut up. Right. Here's your qualifying offer. Go sit over there. You don't want our 7-year monster, you're a part of the core, or 8-year monster, you're a part of the core contract that we were prepared to give you. Okay, well then you're going to just stay here and live on bridge deals until you're a UFA. I don't know. That probably would have blown up in their face or something, but a part of me was tempted because that is a young player just approaching his prime, and to give him up, sure, he's not a 200-foot player and his defense is suspect and yada, yada, yada. And it's not like this is an excuse. Tage Thompson's defense is suspect. We're not divesting ourselves of him because, he made the mistake of signing for 7 years already, so he's stuck here. It's very frustrating, man, to be in such a position of vulnerability to a 23-year-old kid's whim. I don't want to do this. I don't know, man. It just kind of just sucks.
You're right. It's a tough situation, and maybe if they don't do that, it blows up in their face. But we've seen it done before, and I think that's an indictment on the front office and honestly the entire organization, and not have somebody who can sit him down in a room and really sit down with him and say, listen, this is how it's going to be. You're going to perform, and if you don't, no team's going to want you in the future. You're coming off a career year, and if you decide to go in the tank, that's going to shut down your entire progression. So I think it's an indictment on the front office. I think it's an indictment on the entire organization, like you're saying. And the shift to this, and this is what a topic Walt and I discussed previously, the shift to the big, tough defensive players and being harder to play against. I mean, they've beaten that into the ground. And I know Kesselring goes along with that, but at some point you got to score goals. And like you said, if they don't get that return on Bowen Byram, it does make that entire Peterka situation kind of for naught.
Yeah. And, there's a lot to say about, look, they definitely needed and need to become harder to play against and have a more well-rounded team. And that's where the initial, okay, I like this trade comes from, because I can see the roles, I can see what they're chasing, and it makes some sense. But,
you can't give them the benefit of the doubt.
No, I know. Well, let's not forget this is the second year in a row of getting tougher to play against. And they built a fourth line and spent 5 times more on it than the Florida Panthers do on their fourth line. And 2/3 of it are already gone. That was last summer. So, bigger and harder to play against is a lot to me like in football when you have the players coach and that doesn't work and he gives you a ping pong table and then you pivot to the mustache mean coach who takes away the ping pong table. Like it's not exactly a great correlation, but it works for me. Like it's just a thing to say to get through the summer. Harder to play against. We're going to be tougher. Okay, sounds good. Really, I think the only thing that can save them is an incredible nobody saw it coming goalie season. That's the space on the board I'm going to occupy. How do the Sabres turn it around and break a 14-year playoff drought? Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen or Devin Levi or Alex Lyon, I suppose, has like some crazy .925 save percentage, and they make the 8th seed.
And that's where I want to go next. How much are we expecting out of young Alex Lyon? Now, strong name aside. It's a very strong name.
Well, not that young, though. He's 32. He's been around.
Right. He's a veteran. I think he's a presence that they need with UPL's volatility and Devin Levi. Not sure if he's an AHL superstar or whether he's NHL caliber. So
I'm not at all
but what do we expect out of him?
Yeah, I'm not making fun of the Alex Lyon signing. It's a perfectly suitable, backup goaltender, break glass in case of emergency. You have to play 8 out of 10 because Luukkonen is bad or injured or Levi, whatever. It's a fine idea. But it's just to say, in the big scheme of things, they need some incredible goalie season to save them, because I don't think if they get average goaltending, like anything short of what UPL did 2 years ago, I think they're probably cooked.
Yeah. And how about last thing on the skaters? How about young Justin Danforth, the potential savior that he is? The 9 goals, 12 assists. Well, I'm not undermining this signing either. These are nice players who have had good moments in their career. It's just I think they're underwhelming when you're looking at what you expected this offseason to be. And the return that you're getting, it is a little bit of a disappointment.
Well, the thing that Danforth sort of was a tipping point for me here, early on this summer, is that it got me to counting up NHL contracts for forwards, and they're at 13, 14 if you count Kozak, who could be your fourth line center down the road. I think Krebs is going to hold down that role for now, but unless Krebs or Benson or Quinn or your name here is a sweetener in a Byram trade to get you a suitable Peterka replacement, they already have more forwards here than I can fit. And the Danforth acquisition sort of might cut out Josh Doan, who I liked the idea of it. But now Danforth is he's making $1.8 million. He's not sitting in the press box or going to Rochester on that contract. So now Doan, and it's nothing against Danforth, he might be a very suitable, maybe even a better role player than Doan. But at least Doan was young and can really shoot the puck and is reasonably physical, big, sort of fit a certain mode that they don't have a lot of. And I'm just not sure that Danforth. There's too many guys again that aren't any good.
Too many guys. Exactly how I would put it. They're just guys. They don't have enough over the top talent that's going to carry them forward. And what they're hoping is end this disgusting playoff drought. But let's backtrack to the Bowen Byram saga, kind of the headline of this podcast, the headline of the offseason at this point. You already kind of laid out your take for the saga and how things have played out. What can they get for him at this point? What have you heard of the teams involved? I know St. Louis with neighbors and a few others. Walt brought up previously. Kyrou seems like pie in the sky. He's not going to waive his no trade clause to come to Buffalo. Yeah. What can the Sabres even turn Byram into at this point?
I just think the opportunity to really do it their best chance probably already blew by because there's just fewer teams that will still be looking, I think. And so I'm not, I mean, to say I'm not optimistic is even an understatement. I can't imagine a scenario where they're going to be perceived correctly as having gotten the better player in the trade. If they even trade him. I mean, this whole thing is starting to set up like, we'll let him choose 2 years and walk him right to UFA. And maybe, if we're not good this year or next year at the trade deadline, we deal him then as a rental or something. I think that's the best case scenario. He, the positive in that is that while he's kind of a disaster, if he's separated from Dahlin, he and Dahlin together, and I don't think just anyone can do, sure, you should be able to pair, your name here with Dahlin and win those minutes. I think Byram and Dahlin together had some really, really good moments together and can really be an interesting, exciting pair. I just don't know there's going to be enough up front to supplement what they can do. So him being on the team isn't, to me, a disaster by any means. I think those will be good minutes for them. But if they have to split them up for any reason, I mean, look out below. Byram, his numbers when he's separated from Dahlin were just bad. So I'd be really worried about that. But I like the player. I was excited about his acquisition, when they got him for Middlestat at the deadline in 24. And, I think I can still see him playing good minutes with Dahlin, but it's just not where you want it to be. I mean, and I don't think, talk about guys who don't want to be here. I mean, he certainly sounded more sour on the idea of committing long-term here than Peterka even did. And that's, for public consumption. And maybe Peterka was just a better card player than Byram is. I don't know. But I'm right now, I would bet on him being on the team.
And that's where I'm leaning as well. And I agree with you. I don't think there's any way that he looks at it and he wants to remain in Buffalo. The opportunity on the power play isn't there. He's really not in line for any increased role in that regard. So I think he's limited in somewhat of his development as a player if he sticks around.
And Alex, in that regard, I think he did them a favor because I would not, with Power already locked in and Dahlin locked in, I was not in favor of giving out an 8-year, $64 million contract or more to Bowen Byram, especially with the flaws that I just pointed out that, I think most people know about. So I don't Bulldog knows something about Byram. I think everybody knows it. And the Sabres should know it and respect it and not overreact to the good he can do with Dahlin. It's just not a player, to me, worth investing big money in.
Yeah. I don't think they will either. I think at some point it's going to end up in a trade, but I think at this point he's kind of dead set on sticking on this team to start this upcoming campaign. Now let's just finish this off with an overarching conversation, maybe backtracking to some earlier points. What does this team have to do this year? I mean, you turn it over to kind of Lindy's mentality, that the tougher to play against, get stronger in the back end, deeper in the back end. And I'm not sure that's an advisable course of action, although Kevin Adams' philosophy certainly hasn't worked the past few years. Lindy has come a long way in terms of his overall philosophy as a coach. He's become much more open-minded and much more of a progressive coach, I think, over the years. But at the same time, he's long in the tooth. He's not a spring chicken anymore, and kind of going back to that philosophy, although it plays to his strengths, it's kind of questionable. So where do they sit in your mind, and what do they have to do in order to get over this hump?
I mean, I'm not being jerky or cheeky about it. I really think the goalie year is your best hope. I mean, I don't know. FanDuel probably has that at like plus 1,500 odds or something. So go lay your money carefully. I mean, I'm kidding. I don't think you can bet on that sort of thing. At least not, legally on websites. Maybe, you and I could have a wager. So yeah, I don't know, man. The whole Lindy, his voice, the players they're acquiring. Yeah, I mean, the whole time I'm over here going, okay, how long is he going to be here? exactly. Like what are we doing? We're drafting guys in 2025 that maybe will be on the team in 2028 that Lindy Ruff thinks are going. What? Like, I don't know. No, everything about them, almost everything about them, Alex, I think qualifies as both completely absurd and utterly and completely believable at the same time. So I really don't know, but if you wanted to close this out on some sort of positive note, I don't have it for you, man. I don't think they have it. I don't think they're getting it. I think we're lost at sea.
All right. Well, I appreciate the candidness, my friend, and you certainly brought the heat on the premiere pod of Buffalo Pregame here for AMS Publications. I appreciate you joining me on my maiden voyage. Any golf in your future, my friend? I'm sure that's kind of.
There's always go. I played 4 times last week. A little weird week this week, but I played this morning. I'm going to play Thursday, and we're going to be out of town for a bit. So I'm 3 times a week, man. I'm out.
I love it. I got the chance to play with you a few weeks ago. That was a great time, and
that was super fun. Yeah, for sure.
Maybe looking forward to doing that again as well. And thank you for joining me. And you can catch Bulldog every weekday on Show Up in the Bulldog 3 to 7 ish on WGR. I think you're solo next week, right?
No, actually, I'm solo Friday. Mike is off Friday.
Okay.
And then I'm gone the whole following week.
Okay.
At the end of July, he's away for a stretch. So it's that time of the year, man. We got to squeeze in the vacations.
Yeah, well deserved, my friend. Thank you for joining me, and we'll catch you soon. I cut him off. Sorry about that. All right. Well, the Bulldog from WGR, like I said, bringing the heat here on Buffalo Pregame, and I can't thank all of you for joining me. I can't thank you enough, I should say, for joining me on this first episode of Buffalo Pregame. Please subscribe on YouTube. That's really big for the pod. Everybody that could subscribe on YouTube as well as wherever you get your podcasts, I'd really, really appreciate it. And if you want to take your support to the next level, feel free to subscribe to the Buffalo Pregame Substack as well, where we'll be bringing you coverage via the written word coming up with Bills training camp when it really kicks into high gear. So I want to thank everybody for joining me. We'll be back with another podcast maybe tomorrow, sometime later this week. Bruce Nolan and Matt Perino will be joining me to talk Bills. So looking forward to that. And I want to thank Walt from the Sabremetrix Pod and the Charging Buffalo, as well as Chris Parker, the Bulldog from WGR 550, Show Up in the Bulldog, for joining me on this show. And we will see everybody next